And I want to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so pleased that you've decided to discover Dunans Castle. And we're going to hear a tale of preservation in the Scottish Highlands tonight. My name is Laurie Comlin, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Forbes House Museum. Before I get into our further introductions, I did want to relay just a few Zoom tips for our time together. During the talk, we'll ask everyone to keep their microphones muted, but when Charles concludes his talk and opens it up for questions and answers, you will be free to unmute yourself. Or alternatively, if you have questions during the talk, you can always put those in the chat. The chat will be monitored, and then all of those questions will be relayed to Charles at the end of his talk. We are also recording, and so we will send a link out to all of the registrants as well in a few days' time. So on to the introductions. I wanted to give you just a brief overview of the Forbes House Museum if you're not already familiar with us. We're located in Milton, Massachusetts, on land that was stewarded by the Neponset group of the indigenous Massachusetts people until the 18th century. And then in the 18th century, it was the home of Thomas Hutchinson, who was the very last royal civilian governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony before the American Revolution. In 1833, the Forbes Mansion was built by Captain Robert Bennett Forbes and his brother John Murray Forbes for their mother and 4 sisters. Both the captain and John Murray Forbes were involved in America's early China trade. Later, the captain conducted the United States' very first international humanitarian aid mission, which provided relief to the Irish people during that country's Great Famine. And John Murray Forbes later became a devoted abolitionist and an advisor to Abraham Lincoln, as well as president of 2 railroads. And so today, the museum maintains and stewards the mansion, grounds, and a collection which includes Chinese export art and porcelain, items from the captain's Irish voyage, as well as Civil War and Abraham Lincoln memorabilia. And the museum is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So you might be wondering why we're hosting a talk about restoring a castle in Scotland. Well, as you can likely tell from our name, the Forbes family originated in Scotland, and this branch of the family were very proud of their Scottish roots and heritage. So, as I mentioned in my email to all of you, May is Preservation Month here in the United States, and we thought what better way to kick it off than discovering Dunans Castle and honoring the Scottish heritage of the Forbes. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce Charles Dixon-Spain, who is the current owner and restorer of the castle, which is located in Collintrive, which is a village in the Scottish Highlands. And Charles, of course, will tell you about his adventures with the castle, but here's a little bit about him and his background. So Charles holds a Master of Arts in New Literatures and English from Hull University and spent a decade in publishing, graphic design, and web development before moving to Scotland, where he ran a marketing and new media consultancy. During the last decade and a half, Charles has worked exclusively on this renovation project and the associated business, ScottishLairds, which now also incorporates forestry, online retail, and sustainable tourism. In 2023, Charles published the first 2 parts of his memoir, How to Restore a Castle, seems appropriate. And a year later, he published the photographic record of the progress so far in a tome titled Dunans Decade, 2014 to 2024. And both of these, of course, are available on Amazon. And I wanted to add one other accolade to Charles's accomplishments, and that is that he is a consummate host. I had the very good fortune last year to actually be able to volunteer at Dunans Castle through Adventures in Preservation, which is a US-based nonprofit offering opportunities to travel and do hands-on preservation work around the world. And they partnered with Charles. So I got to volunteer there, and Charles did an absolutely phenomenal job. He did absolutely everything from shuttling us around the Highlands. He took us on small adventures when we weren't doing masonry work, and he even made us lunch every single day. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Charles Dixon-Spain.
Oh, thank you so much. I have to confess immediately that I didn't cook the lunches. They were by my very good friend Kate, who is a fabulous caterer and has fed our volunteers over several fortnights now and does a fabulous job. So that's one accolade I can't take. However, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for making the time to listen to this presentation. So I have a slideshow. It's going to be some sort of 60 images or so. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how Sadie and I found the castle, the history of the castle, why it is that it is now a roofless ruin, and then after that, the progress we've made to restoring it, and also talk a little bit about how restoration is perhaps physical works, but is also the works around making a place sustainable and giving it a future for in perpetuity, because I think that's one of the things that when we talk about the history, we learn that the building was not sustainable for the family who was living there in the long term. But we will come to that. I'm now going to share the slideshow, so you'll not see my face for a while. But if anybody can't see it, please let us know. So I'm just going to select that and share. Now, hopefully, you can all see that.
Charles, I'm going to confirm that I can see it. And so
Absolutely.
hopefully everyone else can see it
Okay.
as well.
Super. I'm going to presume that's the case, so we will move forward. So that's Dunans Castle. As you can see, it doesn't have a roof, but there's a fabulous view towards it. I'm going to move on to this that gives you an idea of the extent of the building. As you can see, there is a large roofless ruin, which is a 20-meter by 20-meter box. It's probably 60 feet by 60 feet by about 55 foot tall. So it's a significant size. And behind that is a roofed house, and that roofed house is where I'm presently sitting. In fact, you can see a lean-to to the back right corner with two window lights. That's the room that I presently am in. And actually, the other thing to point out here is the ruin on the right hand side, which is Dunans. And then between those and just to the north, or to the top of the photo, is the bridge. The bridge is going to figure quite a great deal in the story, partly because it is the only access to the site, but also because it was designed by Thomas Telford and is A-listed. Dunans is on the west coast of Scotland, in that big red circle. You can see Glasgow down there on the right hand side, and I think as long as you've got a fairly reasonable knowledge of Scottish geography, then you should be able to tell it is going to be on the wetter side of Scotland. In fact, we have so much rain that sometimes I wish it would stop. Having said that, over the last month, we've had beautiful sunshine, so we felt very lucky, particularly after losing several trees to a big storm in January. When you approach Dunans from the roadside, you don't really know what you are approaching. You drive, and this is what happened to Sadie and myself. We were living in London and had always thought we would move to a rural location. And we were visiting my mother-in-law on the Isle of Arran. we had decided that we'd go further north and see my father, who lives in Oban. And so we were traveling along the A886. And along that road, there is the beautiful Glen of Glendaruel. And as it rises towards the watershed, we found ourselves confronted with a very large for sale sign. It was almost as if, as we had driven along the glen, thinking, this looks a really nice glen. I like those farmhouses. It's very bucolic, we thought. A sort of rural location that we might really enjoy living in. And to see a for sale sign, well, it made me lift my foot just slightly off the accelerator. And Sadie looked across at me and said, well, why not? Let's go and have a look. And on that decision, the last 25 years have rested. So we turned in and we drove down this drive, not knowing what we would find, thinking that perhaps we would find a steading, a farmhouse. Instead, we found this. And I paused, or actually stalled the car between those two first roundels, absolutely amazed at what I was seeing. We sat there for 5 minutes, not saying very much, and then turned to one another and nodded and said, yes, perhaps we should go and have a look. And perhaps we found a place that we might enjoy an adventure in. I'm not sure. I think both of us still feel we made the right decision. It's been quite stressful. There have been things that have happened which have been extraordinary, but it has certainly been an adventure. And part of the reason that we stopped is because this is a designed view. And this is where we get into some of the qualities of the building, which I think, or the site, which make it so attractive. So the bridge, which was built in 1815 by Thomas Telford, was commissioned by John Fletcher. And John Fletcher and his wife had an idea that they would extend their small house. And looking at this image, you can see the small house on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is the building that they dreamed of. But to build that, they had to first create a crossing which would take all of those materials across the ravine. The ravine is some 45 feet deep. I think I've got a picture of it later on that you'll see the extent of it. They only had at the time a wooden bridge. So Thomas Telford, luckily, was building over 1,000 miles of road up the west coast of Scotland. And he happened to be talking with John Fletcher, who decided to commission him. And commission him he did. And it was built in 1815, as I've said. Locally, it is supposed to have been commemorating the Battle of Waterloo, where many Argyll and Sutherland soldiers had been killed. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But what I do know is that it nearly bust the family. They nearly went bankrupt. It was such an expensive undertaking that they couldn't then continue with their project. And it actually ended up being their son, John's son, who actually built the castle. In the interim, and that's 50 years later, in the interim, the family planted the trees that frame the view of the castle. They were all planted in 1849 with trees that had been brought back from the United States by the younger family, who, funnily enough, lived over the hill in a large house called Benmore, which transpires is now the Royal Botanic Garden. So there was a multi-generation vision about what the family wanted to achieve at Dunans. If I give you the next slide, you can see what the building looked like at the turn of the century. The roof, the way that it sits upon that ledge, the ha-ha, the candle snuffer roofs. This is a classic Franco-baronial piece of architecture designed by Andrew Kerr and designed to accommodate a family of 6. We'll get on to that in a bit. I also need to show you the bridge itself, because the bridge is the most important item on site. Now, when we came here, we didn't get any paperwork from the previous owners showing us the commissioning papers for this bridge. And in fact, when we brought Historic Scotland on site, because we couldn't produce those papers, they did not believe that this was a Telford. The reason they didn't believe it was a Telford is because it's so unusual. As you can see from this picture, the arches are Gothic arches. He always designed bridges with a single span, which was rounded. So this is highly unusual in that regard. It also has, and you can just about see them, gargoyles on this side. There are three of them. One has his hands over his mouth, the other has his hands over his ears, and the final one has his hands over his eyes. And we think that's because John Fletcher was a solicitor and wanted to provide a reference to his profession on the bridge, a jokey reference. And that's something else that Telford didn't do. He didn't use fripperies or make jokes. The other thing that caused consternation with Historic Scotland were these octagonal stanchions that sit either side of the large arch and to the right of the small arch there. That was not something that Telford had ever done. And we were given the task of trying to prove that this was a Telford, despite the fact that the listing said it was. And in fact, we did. And we're going to come to that in a wee while. As I've said, the building itself is in two parts. We have the large castle and the small house. And it is the small house that is most important to our tale as we begin an historical examination of how this building came to be. You can see from the plans here that the castle is a large block. The house to the left is much smaller. It originally was a T shape, and you can see the original shape of the house in the thick walls of the, I'm just trying to think how to describe this. It's quite difficult. I don't know whether you can see my mouse, but it is the T shape at the end there, which is the original building, which we think, well, it was first marked on maps in 1590. And you can see Dunan there as a double-fronted house with two windows and a doorway. It's on its side at the head of that river. There is just to the east of it, Dunandone as well, to give you a marker. And that's 1590. So we know the house existed as the T-shaped mansion that we had then. We think, given the restoration work that we did when we worked on it in 2006-7, with lintels that were probably about 5 foot high, it might originally have been some sort of bothy or byre, or some form of agricultural building in which shepherds and their flocks would shelter in the particularly bad weather that we sometimes have here. I mean, you know, it occasionally rains. Anyway, so that's the map from 1590. In the 1749, we then have Dunans, and we have M. Fletcher, Esquire, as owner. You'll also see, if you look carefully, just to the right of it, right of Dunans, you'll see Barniel, and that's Don Fletcher, Esquire, which gives you the indication that the Fletchers were quite wealthy landowners. Now, the tale of the Fletchers getting to Glendaruel is quite an interesting one. You see, the whole of this area was originally owned or ruled by Clan Lamont, and they had a castle down to the south and east of Dunans, which is where their clan seat was. Dunans was one of their hunting lodges and drovers' accommodations. However, in about something like 1630, they fell out with Clan Campbell. Everybody falls out with Clan Campbell, but Clan Campbell decided they want all of these lands for themselves, so they besieged Clan Lamont at Castle Toward. The tale is that for 3 weeks the Lamonts held out, and after 3 weeks they signed a treaty, and that treaty was duly ratified, and the Lamonts opened their doors, the Campbells came in and massacred everyone. except for Lady Lamont and her daughters, whom they stripped naked, paraded down the beach, and sent off to Ireland in a small rowboat. The Campbells did not know that Lady Lamont had wound the treaty in her hair and smuggled it out. And so when she came back 10 years later, was able to prosecute the Duke of Argyll for his perfidy and retain some of their lands. However, Dunans was not retained and remained in Campbell hands of a family called the Blairs. The Blairs, however, were supporters of Scottish independence, and therefore, when independence faltered in 1745, they forfeited their property, and the property was Dunans plus around 40,000 acres. The property was taken into administration by the court, and they then put the property out for lease. Along came a fine upstanding family calling themselves Fletchers, having obviously the requisite funds, who were able to persuade the court to lease the building and the land to them for 10 years, after which the Fletchers bought the property. What the court did not know was that the Fletchers had recently been of a place called Argyll Castle in Glencoe, the Rannoch Moor. And unfortunately for the Fletchers, or the MacAlisters as they were known then, they had been thrown out by Clan Campbell. And they'd been thrown out of Clan Campbell not because they were particularly independence-minded for Scotland, although they were, but because they had spent the previous couple of generations acting as a fence. Well, this is my story. I can't say that it's. I'm not sure that the clan historians would agree with me, but what I divine is that the Fletchers were selling the stolen goods, the cattle and sheep, that the MacGregor clan had been stealing on the east coast and using the Fletchers to sell onto the west coast. That trade caught the attention of the Campbells, who didn't like it, and so threw the Fletchers out. The Fletchers, wanting to come to somewhere they knew was going to be friendly, came to Glendaruel and to Dunans, because just over the other hill is a place called Lairds Castle, where one of the most well thought of and high profile Scottish Catholic families lived. The Fletchers were Catholics as well. So the Fletchers come to Dunans and they decide that they are going to set up business as a legitimate drover family. And for 2 generations, they did just that. They made a great deal of money from droving. Their business was based around a contract with the Marquis of Bute, who effectively used the whole of his island to raise cattle. The Fletchers would then buy those cattle, bring them up the glen and around into the central belt, where they would sell them. They did so well that by the time we get to John Fletcher, the family had decided they weren't going to be drovers and they were going to improve their building. By the time we get to John Fletcher's son, Archibald, we start to see the family launder their reputation, shall we say, and find ways through the architecture of the building to establish their gentry, their qualifications, as it were. So here we've got some indications. On the left-hand side, we have Stuart and Fletcher. Now, this is the Stuarts of Appin, related to the royal family, and Le Chadou, which is actually Gaelic for separate yet together. This is, given the blade that the 2 hands are holding, a martial alliance, and one which is celebrated on the curtain wall that people arriving first see. It is obvious that the Fletchers want you to have that impression of a family who have really made it. On one of the gables there is the coat of arms, and above the front door you'll see also the Fletcher family crest. You can't quite see it in that photo, but it is top right and bottom left, quivers of arrows indicating their arrow making history with ropes around all of that. Now, that's not to say that this is a naval family, but that the castle, when it was built by or from the proceeds of a very advantageous marriage. So I am told. And then on the right hand side, you have the Fletcher the Fletcher family crest, the bow and arrow, which surmounts the tallest gablet on the building. Let me just see if I've got what my next slide is. Oh, yes. So the family, I'll just go back to this slide. The family then built the castle with the roofs. Actually, let's have the antique photo. They built this castle in 1864 from a design by Andrew Kerr, who was an Edinburgh architect. The building was designed to accommodate the married couple whose master bedroom had its dressing room in that top room of the turret. All of the bedrooms were in the top floor because the family actually lived in the middle floor of the castle, and then the ground floor and the old house were used for servants' quarters, for guest rooms, and for services. The curtain wall, which you can see there just to the front left of the main building, is where the insignia I've just been describing is placed. And the reason you have a curtain wall there is not for defence. It is actually because in the courtyard behind that wall was the laundry yard. So for the High Higgins who were visiting John Fletcher and his son Archibald, they weren't confronted with the Laird Smalls as they arrived and came up to the front door, which is there in the middle of the front facade of the castle. The other important thing to say about the castle is just to look at the roof. Now, of the main part of the castle, you'll see that there are many ridges and that there are some big valleys. And that's really important in a climate as wet and as stormy as that of Argyll's. And it will become more important as time goes on. The family lived in the castle full time until the First World War, and that seemed to be a very happy time. We have tales of the family having a 21st in the corridor which ran right through both buildings. There were 80 guests apparently, and they had a ceilidh afterwards, and much whiskey was drunk. Of course, much whiskey was drunk. That's what you drink on the West Coast. So here's a representation of the estate from that period, and there you have, with the number 87, Dunans, quite clearly showing the size of the building, and there 85 is the bridge, with various other buildings all set around, and the two rivers, the Carl Glen to the top left, and the Garvey Burn to the right. There are all sorts of other archaeological items in this area, but the thing that I've always felt quite interesting is that Dunans as a name means either heap or fort, and this being in proximity to a Viking invasion and battle with the Glendarules in something like 1050 or slightly earlier, seems to me to be the strategic point, and why not put a building there. Moving on though, I want to come to the interwar period and the Second World War. So on the left hand side we have Jean McKellar from the 1930s, and this is when the building was used for holidays. It was rented out a couple of times because the family had moved over to Edinburgh. They were finding it difficult to make a proper income by staying in Argyll, so all the solicitors went over to Edinburgh to earn money. It was only after the Second World War, when that branch of the family had died out, that Colonel Fletcher and his family moved in about 1952. Now, Colonel Fletcher was a great and well-beloved man of Argyll. He became Lord Lieutenant, which is one of the highest ceremonial positions in any county. He was leader of the local county council. He was obviously a soldier. He had his wife, Helen, was also well beloved in the community, and they had 3 kids. And about the time that this photo was taken, they started to make some changes with the castle. And I'm just seeing, so yes, here we are. So this is from about that period, so the 1970s, and that's Colonel Fletcher's son Angus there, kicking a ball across the lawn. Now, as you can see, the building looks as though it's in reasonable nick. What you can't see, and what Angus told me when I met him about 10 years ago, he rang me up and said, Charles, we want to come to Dunans. And I said, oh, what, to see the castle? No, I don't really want to see the castle. What I want to do is show my kids where I used to make dens in the ravine. Because I've told them so many tales about it. I've said that we'll come and have a visit. I said, fine, but you have to then walk with me around the castle and tell me what it was like to live here when you were a boy. And he told me 2 things. The first was that in the 1970s, there was a point where the roof was leaking so much because of these 2 huge V's in the roof that I pointed out earlier, that the whole of the top floor was soaked. And the family decided that they would have to move all of their rooms down to the middle floor and use the top floor as guest rooms. And then the ground floor then became their main living quarters. He said that it was a massive upheaval, but worth it. The other thing is that he and his friend Donny, who lives next door still, used to go around with their BB gun, their air rifle, and take pot shots at all of the lead finials on top of the candle snuffer roofs. There's one which I swear I can still see the pellet marks on them. Boys will be boys, I suppose. So Colonel Fletcher died in 1996, and the family Angus decided that he wasn't going to live there, and they put the property on the market. As Angus said, why would I want to give up a job in California with the Jim Henson Corporation to move to rainy old Argyll? So the property was put on the market, and it was sold to a gentleman who wanted to run it as an old folks home. It was sold with 250 acres, and those 250 acres are really uphill and to the left on that picture. All that woodland was entailed with it. That gentleman was foreclosed after about 18 months, and another couple bought it. They bought the castle and about 16 acres with the other guy retaining the woodland. They wanted to run it as a hotel, and they spent $250,000 on the interior of the property without actually dealing with the problems of the roof. They opened in early 2000 to great acclaim. They were booked solid. They had weddings, they had a juice bar, apparently, they had ceilidhs, they had classical recitals, and they got lots of publicity. Great for a newly started business. The problem was that in the August of 2000, Argyll and Bute Council came along, the planning department, and said, this is wonderful, we love to see new businesses, but you do not have planning consent to run as a hotel. You need to get the paperwork in place. Would you do that as quickly as possible? We're not going to close you down, but you need to get this moving. So this was August 2000. In September 2000, they install a fire alarm. The fire alarm spends that autumn going off left, right and centre because people still smoked indoors. There was often toast burnt, but mostly because as a large building, as a large Victorian building with single glazing, it was quite cold. And so the guests liked to have the fires lit. And the problem with the fires and the flues was that the flues would leak, and the flues leaked smoke into the building. So the smoke would set off the fire alarm, and that then meant that everybody ignored the fire alarm when and as. The other thing that they were told to do was line the chimneys to stop this happening, and the last thing was to put a 5,000-gallon lake in the field behind the castle. Actually, you can see the field behind there. There is no lake. They didn't get to it. On January the 13th, 2001, their luck ran out. They had a stag party who had had a lovely evening in Dunoon, who went out, came back, all rather worse for wear. One chap who was sleeping in the top of the castle went to bed. Because he was quite drunk, he ignored the hostess's instructions not to light anything in the grate, found a potpourri and lit it, and then promptly fell asleep. The fire alarm went off fairly much immediately because unfortunately that flue had never been tested and let itself into the attic area, the roof space. It caught quite considerably, but nobody, of course, was able to nobody raised the alarm because everybody disbelieved the fire alarm until somebody went outside and had a cigarette and looked up to the roof and saw sparks flying. The roof was lost immediately. The owners rang up their insurers the next day, and because they didn't have the paperwork, were not insured. They tried for 6 months to put a temporary roof on the structure. They couldn't do it. They couldn't afford it, and that's when they put the building on the market. And in 2002, that's when Sadie and I found it. We managed to get to buy the castle in 2003. And these pictures kind of give you an idea of the state of the building. Beautiful, but terribly, terribly maltreated. Here's a photo of the back of the building. You can see both the overburden in the main part of the castle, but also the state of the roof of the house and the lean-to at the back there, and also the ground around it. So it was really in a fairly parlous state. The overburden was quite extraordinary. This is in what was the library. I'm presently standing on this rubble, and my knees are at lintel height of the doors. So it's a good 6 to 8 feet deep. Here's another view. And as you can see, this is after 3 or 4 years. The bracken has all come up. There's moss everywhere. It gives you a real idea of the devastation. This is not to say the grounds aren't beautiful, and we have been very lucky. The sort of the lovely thing is that even though we have at the centre this ruin, the grounds provide us with a level of solace, I suppose you'd say. I would also point out there are the bluebells, which are just coming out now. So if you ever want to come to Dunans, May is wonderful, as is on the left-hand side, September. In the middle is winter, but you can also see our tallest tree, which will play a part of the narrative shortly. Here are photos of the bridge as it was before we'd done any work. You can see how much foliage is on that, as well as here. So all this foliage is starting to disrupt the structure. You've got the great arch there, which we are going to be working on in September, and the small arch there, which the AIP jammers dealt with in 2019. When we moved to Dunans, we moved into a garden shed, which we fitted out, and we spent 4.5 years in there. We acquired 2 daughters, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and not a little bit of cabin fever, I suspect. However, there are our daughters. That's the christening, about 2 or 3 years in at the local Clachan. Gives you an idea of, yes, we'd made it. In 2006, and I'm rattling through these because I want to get to the really important bit about what we're going to do. This is the restoration of the house, which we completed in 2007 and which we did entirely privately. I've got a picture of the slate there because the slate is a major component of the challenges that restoring the castle will give us, because those slate are all recovered from old buildings because they're no longer quarried in Scotland, anywhere in the world, and to get the right look on the roof we need to use those slates. I also want to highlight at this time, my lovely wife began the Walking Theatre Company here. She is playing Lady Macbeth in the grounds of the castle. And this business started in 2005 out of necessity and out of the fact that we were in the middle of Argyll, taught me a great lesson about being innovative and finding ways of using what you have, what is around you, to create a sustainable income, or even better than a sustainable income, that would then allow us to stay at Dunans and make sure we can restore the castle. We moved into the house, and there is the roof with that slate. We moved into this house, as I said, in 2007, and actually spent the 2 coldest years I've ever spent anywhere, because it was soaking wet after about 30 years of being uninhabited. We eventually, after 2 years, had dried it out enough to make it comfortable. It's now a beautiful, toasty, warm, lovely place. Now, when we got into this house, we realized how expensive the major job was going to be. We also recognized that the castle was highly popular with visitors. We would always get people just turning up on spec saying, what are you doing? What's the story? How's it all going? Can we help? And Sadie and I both felt that this was something that was pointing us in the direction of making the castle a public building of some sort. Now, in about 2000, Sadie had given me a wonderful gift. She had given me a square foot of Scotland and said, this is your first square foot of Scotland. This is where we're going to live. So I wanted you to have a connection now. And I looked at it and thought, what a wonderful gift idea. The problem was, it was a square foot in a field in the middle of nowhere full of brambles. I couldn't go and visit it. There was nothing going on there. And that made me slightly disappointed. But evidently, I hid that idea away from, or in the back of my mind. And in 2007, it came back to me. Lucky, because in 2009, we had, at the tree that we have views on, the Douglas fir was declared the tallest in the UK. It went through all the press. And by this time, I had set up Dunans Castle, ScottishLaird. And because this got national profile, we got, within about 6 months of these news stories going out, a phone call from a company called Gift Republic, who said, you do Lairds. We'd like you to provide us with Laird chips because we'd like to sell this all around the world. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. They said, we saw the story about the tallest tree and then looked at your project and thought, this is wonderful. About 6 months after that, Groupon did the same thing. I got a phone call from Groupon UK who said, actually, we love this. This is a great project. We've seen it in WH Smith, of all places, and Walmart, and we love it. We want to get involved. Can we do a voucher scheme? Those 2 contacts out of the tallest tree gave us the profile that then allowed us to move on to the restoration in a proper thoroughgoing sense. So in 2013, we commissioned Robin Kent, heritage architect, to begin the process of getting us towards the restoration of the bridge and the castle, because we now had a bit of budget. We had some funding, we had some income. And he wrote a conservation plan, which then, using my skills that you were given in my biography, created a book, the Conservation Plan for Dunans, in 2014. We've sold over 6,000 of these, and it gives you the basics of the plan. In particular, and there are some photos there that you'll have already seen, but in particular, a plan for the bridge. Because the bridge is the key access to the site and therefore needs to, at the moment, it has a 7.5 ton weight limit on it. We need to get that up to 20 tons. Over the last few years, with volunteers, etc., we are moving towards the clean bridge that we should have, and that will then enable us to move forward with the castle project. into 2014, Robin there in the white hat, that's Barty the Basset in the foreground. Obviously, that's the most important individual on screen. But Robin there in the high-vis jacket is the architect. And what he's doing is helping us prove that this is a Telford bridge by digging a hole and showing that along the deck are 4 longitudinal ribs, which only Telford used in 1815. Everybody cottoned on to them after about 1820, but only Telford used them because what they do is they hold the aggregate into the centre of the bridge deck rather than pushing out and ruining the parapets. As he said, there was no way there weren't longitudinal ribs there because the bridge was still standing, but it was nice to see them and nice to have the proof positive. That was one of the things that the Lairdship project helped us afford. Another was the steps down to the bridge, and further the resurfacing of the bridge itself, such that by the time we get to starting to do works under the bridge, we have a new surface. So that's stage 1. Now here are our first batch of AIP jammers. Now these guys were here in 2018, and their job, well, there were 2, was one to deal with the parapet walls and re-point them on the inside, and then also there were some steps that the gentleman there with the barrow and his lovely wife rebuilt just in front of the castle. I don't have that photo, unfortunately. And then in 2019, this crew, including some of the people from 2018, got underneath the bridge and started filling the cracks with lime cement. They did a stunning job. It was really, really fun to watch it all go ahead. And by the end of that particular project, we had one of the 3 arches restored, which was wonderful. We entertained them. We had guitars and we had barbecues and we had all sorts. And we do those sort of things with all projects. Although, actually, I now tend to take people to the pub because there's draft Guinness and things like that, which obviously I love. In the interim, I spent a lot of time starting to clear the castle out. This is 2017 with Sadie there, looking wistfully at the top of it, thinking, when will we ever get a roof? And here is the mini digger that I used to do quite a lot of the clearance of that particular room. However, whilst doing that, I realized that I wasn't confident doing this myself. We were starting to get a patter of stone coming down on me whilst I was working, and I felt that we needed to get a professional firm in to clear the castle. So what we did was we got a company called BT's, a demolition firm, who specialized in the clearance of these sort of structures to come in at the end of 2019. And the idea was that they would clear out the structure, and that then in 2020, March 2020, we would get in there and we would start to cap the walls, sort out some of the lintels, do that sort of basic work. We had the budget, we had the workforce. As you can see, the wall tops were suffering, are suffering. And this is, I love this shot, the view down the turret. And you can see there on the the left-hand side, how much loose material there is in the top, and also the amount of foliage. One of the things that we have to do regularly is take that foliage out, because it acts as crowbars in the wall to start knocking material down. Now, COVID happened. COVID just knocked us sideways. And because of that, we weren't able to get on with the structural works. In fact, the company who were going to do it said that they had no window to come back for another 6 or 7 years. They were contracted with Historic Scotland for a couple of very large, very prestigious projects, and they were just fitting us in a 3-month window in that. They were kind of starting, I think, on the 31st of March, and I think, or sometime like that, and lockdown happened on the 23rd. I mean, it was awful. Anyway, what that then meant was that in June 2020, when the woodland that the chap who wanted to run the place as a old folks home came back on the market, the 250 acres, we had an opportunity to purchase it. Now, why, you think, would you purchase a woodland when you are supposed to be restoring a castle? Well, if you look at where Dunans is, bottom left, and you look at the river, and you look at the road which is running along the top side of that woodland, which is the main road, and you want to obviate using the access, and you know that the access over the bridge is going to add about 20% to the whole of the project cost, and the project cost is going to be probably around 10 million. You know that by buying that 250 acres and creating a secondary access, you might end up saving probably about 15% of that 20%. No, sorry, 3/4 of that 20%, shall we say. And therefore, it seemed to me to be a no-brainer that if we can find a way of creating a second access to get the 44-ton lorries in, the cranes, etc., then we might have an ability to save a bit of money. Having said that, when we actually purchased it, it became apparent that there was more of an opportunity. First thing we had to do was harvest the ground, and that was heartbreaking because all of these dark Sitka spruces and larches had to go. That allowed us to create a crossing over the river, although it's only a crossing, and left us with a hillside like this. It's now much better, I have to say. It's much, much better. It's actually quite beautiful. What we will end up with is native woodland like this. And the idea is that this native woodland, once planted, will provide us with a carbon offset project so that we can generate the capital to continue the project. And I'm going to talk about the continuation of the project in a minute. I just want to do some photos of our lovely volunteers. Here's the curtain wall being restored. And again, they're doing such a fabulous job. They're having such fun. We have here a couple of volunteers plus Eland in the high-vis jacket repairing one of the roundels that got knocked about by a truck that came over the bridge. Shouldn't have come over the bridge. He got told off. Here is more work going on under the other arch in 2023, which means that we've now restored 2 of the arches and only the large arch is available. And this, I love this photo. This is a photo of one of the groups, including Judith, who are outside Mount Stuart. And Mount Stuart is potentially the most, what I think is the most gorgeous stately home in the UK. I mean, obviously leaving aside Dunans because I'm biased, but this is amazing. And it's on our doorstep and we go and show our volunteers they do a tour and it's just amazing, absolutely amazing. Then we have more repairs to the courtyard, a couple of grinning people here who obviously had lots of fun. And the final tranche of refilling this curtain wall happened very recently, and there are some backs there that some people will recognize, I suspect. So all of the jamming goes on, and what it does is it provides improvements to the fabric of the building. It's really good fun. It gives me and Eland there a real charge because Eland gets to teach people who are willing, able, and really interested. He gets to talk about esoteric things like lime cement and dry stain walling and all of that good stuff. And I get a bunch of people who are so enthusiastic about historic structures that it reinvigorates me. And I completely love that. Now, I want to go on to the future. And it's going to be another 5 minutes, I suspect, just so everybody knows. The future is a woodland on the hill. So there's Dunans. The brown areas are where we're going to replant, and those small and numbered areas are where we're planting sponsored trees for all our lairds and ladies. You'll see an access route through that woodland and across the river. We're not sure that's going to work, but actually secondary access is not our priority at the moment for 2 reasons. The first is that area of yellow and red is where we're going to have our carbon offset, and that carbon offset is going to provide around 25,000 tons of carbon, and that's going to provide us at maybe $15, perhaps $20 a ton, a significant boost, which is going to allow us to do 2 things. Now, I'm going to show you the conceptual plans that were produced by Robin Kent in 2016 to give you an idea of where we went if we were going to do the project as a single project. And I have to say, now looking at them, I think we change it again. But the idea is that we would have a ground floor with a lovely large entertainment space with a green room, which would actually be for Lairds and Ladies, and a circular staircase, etc., etc. And then apartments in the rest of the building. Now, as I say, this isn't going to happen now. And one of the reasons it's not going to happen is because we are not going to strip out the interior walls. If I show you the interior walls, this is what presently stands at Dunans. These 5 or 6 compartments. And these compartments we're going to keep because I don't think we should compromise the structure of it. We should show the structure of the restored building in what we do. And the idea with the monies that we raise from the carbon offset and other business opportunities is to create 2 initial apartments. The first one on the left-hand side where you see the turnpike staircase, we will have over 2 floors a 1-bed apartment for Laird and Lady, Jammer, etc. to stay. And then in the turret, our bottom right, we will again have another 1-bed apartment over 4 floors, all the way up into the candle snuffer roof. And that will allow us to have the to do some work, restore part of the castle, and earn money. If we decided we were going to restore the building in a single go, that would, as I said, cost £10 million or thereabouts. And once the work is done, the property would be worth £2.5 million. So we can't borrow money against it. Also, who'd really want a mortgage of £10 million? I certainly can't imagine myself wanting that. Perhaps if I had a much larger business or I had independent wealth, perhaps, but no, it's not possible in the present circumstances. And so working through this in a piecemeal fashion allows us to do 2 things. It allows the building to earn money after every small, relatively small segment of investment. It also means that we can test both the accommodation, the market for the accommodation, and we can also work through the entire building over a space of time, which allows us to completely de-risk it for ourselves. The idea, and I retire in about 10 or 11 years, is that by the time I retire, we will have restored it. That's the ambition. Whether we can do that is another matter. My feeling is that if we get close, that'll be wonderful. Even if we do those 2 items that I've talked about, that's a hell of an achievement, because what it means is the A-listed bridge has been done and the castle has been stabilised. And those are 2 really important elements of the project. I think in the end, the other thing that I would say, and this is really just as a sidebar, there are other things that go on with restorations, and the restoration here has had exterior factors impact against it. We've had neighbours who have not particularly conducted themselves very well, and it has taken us over 20 years to sort those problems out as well. So there is not only the physical restoration, there is the restoration of the deeds and all of the legal appurtenances around this sort of building. Plus also there is a restoration of sustainability. And if we can, by restoring this building, make it a sustainable visitor attraction held in trust for all of these lairds and ladies who have helped us along over the last few years, then I think we've created a victory. So I think that's about it. I am going to plug my books because they're great books, and I really recommend them. You get the inside story with those. So a lot of the stuff that I've talked about now, but some really great stories. And so long live the adventure. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm now going to hand over to our hosts. So I will stop sharing. There we go.
Charles, that was amazing to take us from the 1500s all the way through to the future of Dunans Castle.
Thank you.
So, and you did it in less than an hour, basically.
I'm amazed.
So
I'm
that's
amazed.
pretty amazing.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful, actually. Just as I was saying about the volunteers inspiring me, actually to do this is inspiring me. It re-energizes me. So thank you for the opportunity. It's been great.
Thank you. And I wanted to just explain to everybody, Charles kept using the word jammers, and that is a specific term for volunteers through the Adventures in Preservation program. They do refer to themselves as jammers. So if you were curious as to what that was, that's a little definition. But Charles, I did want to ask you, you also mentioned Eland a
Yes.
few times without necessarily describing who he is. And I wanted to make sure he got his due because he has been a huge part of your preservation project and
Yeah.
a guide. So I just wanted to give you a chance to maybe explain who Eland is and how he might be sort of an expert to help you understand your
So
building.
yeah. And this is one of the reasons why the AIP thing has been such a joy. Eland is the premier stonemason in Cowell. He is one of perhaps 15 or 20 at the very top of their game in terms of rubble built buildings in the whole of Scotland. He is at the cutting edge of lime cement technology and the thinking around how you restore structures with lime, the sort of mixes you use, using and trying to work out what they used in previous ages, particularly with Thomas Telford, for example. And he is, I mean, the joy of it is that he will take you through that journey of understanding the science of how you bond these structures together, and also how you read the structures. So one of the revelations for me with Eland was when he started talking about I think it was on the first of the arches, he started to talk about what Thomas Telford had designed. And it was almost as if we were having a conversation with Thomas Telford through the stone structure of the bridge. So for me, Eland is inspirational. He is absolutely essential to what we do because he takes care of all the volunteers while they're on site and gives them such a level of insight into these historic structures. It is extraordinary. He's also a really nice bloke, and he's got a dog called Hector and a son called Sandy, who are both stars, but Hector's the really important one, obviously.
Obviously. Charles, there was a question for you if there are any ghost stories about the property.
Oh, ghost stories. Okay. All right. Now, do you want the long or the short? Okay. So there are three ghosts that I really talk about Dunans. The first was I met a builder who'd worked on the castle when it was being renovated to be a hotel. And he said, you know, it's a really odd thing. We used to every day go up and down those stairs, and every day we'd be just stepping over these two dogs that were lying under the bottom step, and we kept doing it. And after a while, we just got so knocked off with it. We said to the lady, listen, could you move your dogs? She said, I don't have dogs. What dogs? So that was quite an interesting one. And it kind of speaks to a building that's been inhabited for a long time. There's obviously the story of Uncle Cyril. Uncle Cyril was well known to everybody in Glendalough, not to myself and Sadie. Had we known who Uncle Cyril was, I think the mystery would have been solved sooner. So the red shed that you saw was surrounded by rhododendrons. And over the first year or two, we cleared those rhododendrons. And thereafter, and bearing in mind that Harry, our eldest, was born in the January, no, in 2003. So this would have been spring 2004. And I was putting Harry to bed at sort of 6 o'clock in the evening and reading her stories. And Sadie used to walk in and say, "Charlie, have you been smoking?" Because I used to smoke and I'd given up, and that was all fine. And no, I've not been smoking. And then we get a waft of alcohol, and this went on for a long time. In fact, it went on for so long. Youngest daughter had come along, and we were still getting this waft of tobacco. And then we started to see this stooped gentleman walking around in blue overalls and a tight blue hat, just occasionally out of the corner of our eyes. And we think, oh, who's that? Have we got anybody on site? Sadie, have you got anybody else? I don't. So we kind of, okay, one of us has got it wrong. It's in the diary, whatever. And then I had a girl working for me called Kirstine, who was actually making herself a cup of tea at the sink in the kitchen, and said, "Oh, is somebody on site?" Now I knew at that point there was nobody on site, so I said no. She said, "Chap has just walked past in," and I said, "in a blue overalls and a beanie," and I poked my head out. No, there was nobody around. But up the track came Donny, who I've talked about earlier, who was friends of Angus, and he used to come over for a cup of coffee. And he comes in and we said, "We've just seen this chap walk round the back of the red shed." He said, "Oh, describe him." And we described him. He said, "Aye, that sounds like Uncle Cyril." "Oh, Uncle Cyril, who's he?" "Well, he died about 20 years ago." Oh, and then I said, so tell us about Uncle Cyril. And apparently, Donny said, "Well, he had his potting shed about where your bedroom is, at the end of the thing, and every evening at about 5:30, 6 o'clock, he used to go in there and he used to have his can of special brew and his cigarette, and he'd smoke those and drink that, and then he'd come into the house about 6:30. That's what we had been smelling for the previous 2 years. We'd been haunted by Uncle Cyril. So there you go, two ghost stories. There is apparently a grey lady who serves.
There's always a grey lady.
There's always a grey lady who serves you tea at 4 a.m., but I've never seen her. One of my brothers claimed to have slept here and seen her, but I think he was just pulling my leg. So there you go, ghosts.
Yes. And at this point, if anyone would like to ask Charles a question, you should be able to unmute yourselves. You can turn on your video if you'd like and ask a question. I know there's a few more in the chat, but I wanted to give people a chance now. If you wanted to ask Charles a question, please do so.
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
Julia, go ahead.
The maintenance of that structure has got to be like massive. So is there like a condo association that will contribute to the maintenance of the castle, or is it under some kind of deed under historic preservation somehow? I don't know.
Okay, so I'll give you the kind of context. So number one, it's a B-listed castle, so we have to make sure that its exterior is maintained as much as we can, and then restored into something that as it was has always been. In terms of its maintenance, the idea is that when we restore it, each of those sections will be used as apartments for people to rent, and that rental income will maintain the property. And the idea is that we set that up as a trust so that it runs in perpetuity and maintains itself in perpetuity. The other thing about it is that when we create anything in the castle, it will be sustainable and it will be replaceable, and we'll make sure that it uses technologies A, that are appropriate for a Victorian building, but B, will ensure that we're not going to be having the similar problems that the Fletchers did. I mean, I have to say, in the 1970s, 1980s, they got a roofing company in to give them an estimate on repairing the roof, and it was something like $250,000, and they just couldn't afford it. And so Colonel Fletcher, whenever they had dinner parties, still had to get up every time it rained to empty the buckets. So we're very aware that there's that sustainability thing, but we are going to, because we're going to do this rental model within a trust, then that income should make a sustainable income for it.
Thank you. Anyone else like to ask a question? Otherwise, I can go to the other ones in the chat at the moment. All right, Charles, there's a question in the chat to ask if there were any interesting artifacts that were found within the materials that were cleared out of the rooms.
So it's, well, I think I think the thing is that had the Fletchers been in residence at the time of the fire, then there would have been two things. There would have been the door of Acheladda, which was the castle door that they took from Acheladda Castle and brought it all the way to Dunans. And the second thing, there was a plaque on the first story landing, which showed that very event with the McGregors and the Fletchers walking across the Rannoch Moor with the door carried between them. As for what we actually found, because it was a hotel, we found several canteens of cutlery. We found a stuffed badger, which one of our Basset dogs particularly enjoyed, dragging out and disemboweling all its green fur. There was a safe, which I spent at least 3 days trying to get into and ended up being empty. And the library was full of, it actually had 3 copies of Margaret Thatcher's memoir. So that kind of gives you a flavour. There were stories when we got to the Glen that all of the fireplaces had been rescued and were presently living in houses all around the Glen. Now, we've never had any of them returned. We were told that they would be returned, obviously, but I do know several houses have got very nice fireplaces. I can't prove it because I don't have any photos of the interior, and anyway, I wouldn't, because most of them are very nice people. So we will find other fireplaces that are equally as beautiful. I hope that's answered your question.
Charles, when you are doing the work, there's a question about, are you making any concessions to modernity? When you're trying to restore versus rehabilitate, are you trying to be, strict preservationists, or are you making some modifications, perhaps in the materials you're using?
So it's a good question. So the first thing is that the 1590 house was substantially remodeled when they built the castle, and the castle was built in 1864. So all of the materials are extant today. In other words, all of the plaster, all of the ceiling roses, all of the architraves are available to us now. So we can, within a reasonable tolerance, reproduce the interior. The bit that we will struggle to reproduce are things like they had a beautiful oak staircase, and that oak staircase was all the way up to the top, and we will only do 2 flights, I think, and that's because of the use that we'll put the building to, which will make it sustainable. So my view is that whatever we do will be as commensurate with the building as possible, but also bearing in mind that we have to make it a sustainable project in the long run. The other side of it is that we'll obviously use insulation. We won't be using conventional central heating. It will probably end up being underfloor heating, and we'll also be using the big question, the big sort of materials question that we have to answer is what roofing material we'll use. I indicated in the presentation that slates are a problem, and the discussion is whether we can use a folded metal or a metal type roof for all of the flat planes, and then use for the candle stuffers, then use the slate for that. But that's very much a discussion about what materials are available to us and what we can actually get, and whether we can, funnily enough, we had a tour today, and one of the guys is a roofer, and he was saying, well, could you use molded material that can then be molded to create the roof? I don't know, but we could have a look at it. The problem is you don't want to go too far, because if you go too far, you create some sort of Frankenstein thing. I think the other thing is I would be very keen to allow the history of the building to express itself. So there has to be some acknowledgement that it's been burnt down. There has to be some sort of way of saying this is a beautiful Victorian building, but it's had a very checkered past.
Yeah.
So that's another consideration.
Charles, somebody was curious about the American tree species and whether you knew what exact tree species those were and whether those are still there or have they been cleared in favor of more native plants?
So the framing trees from bridge to castle, they are things like Douglas firs, noble firs, silver firs, Californian cedar. We did have a monkey puzzle. The monkey puzzle died in 2001, 2002. But that's because it has a 150-year lifespan and it was planted 1849, 1850. So we have seen some of those go, but mostly we try to encourage them to stay. The harvest that we did was all Sitka spruce and larch, which are, well, the Sitka spruce is Swedish, the larch I think is Japanese, and they're commercial crops. We get rid of those and then we plant the native species, the biggest of which is the Scots pine, which we already have several of, and then oak and rowan and mountain ash and hazel and all of those sort of trees to encourage biodiversity, and also to capture as much carbon as possible so that our carbon capture project is really viable. And I should say with the woodland, that will also be open to the public. It will be amenity woodland, so we'll have paths all over there. So when you stay at the castle, you'll be able to walk the woodlands. And if I have my way, we'll have a sculpture park and fishing and all sorts of lovely stuff.
So Charles, that was my last question, was basically for you, which is how can people come and either stay at the castle or get involved in the project?
So the primary way of getting involved in the actual works at the moment is to come along with AIP. And we look after you. You have a
Which
wonderful
stands for
time.
Adventures in Preservation.
Adventures in Preservation, and it is an adventure and it's also lots of fun, and I promise to take you to some wild places, really lovely places, alongside getting you involved in some really important work. Other than that, we do have a glamping place called the Laird's Retreat, which is basically 3 rooms connected by the outside with a fire pit and a beautiful canopy. The quietest, loveliest place in the world. And I recommend that this year from middle of July onwards. Don't book it for between end of May and middle of July. Midges, not good. So that you can stay there. The other thing that you can get involved in is, if you are in our area, is book yourself in for a tour, and then you'll get the serious, proper history from Gordon, our tour guide, who is absolutely superb with his knowledge. He can be a bit brusque, but then he's a Yorkshireman, and then all Yorkshiremen are a bit brusque. But to tell you what, when you get a sense of humour, he can be hilarious. So I think those 3 things are fairly good. If you want to know more, though, the books are a great way in, and have a look at the ScottishLaird website and the titles. We also have a newsletter which you can subscribe. Oh, I can see a book there from yeah, both of them. Look at this. I'm impressed. Bravo, bravo. I hope you've enjoyed. Oh, and this is it. Fantastic. I am. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed them. Excellent. I'm getting thumbs up. Superb. So there are lots of ways to interact, and I'm always very happy to see. Oh, as somebody else, Erica's got one as well. Good one, Erica. Fantastic. So yeah, there's lots of ways to interact. The one thing that I didn't show you was the Dunans tartan, and we'll maybe leave that for another time. But the Dunans tartan is beautiful, and it is only worn by those people who help us restore the castle. So if you want your own tartan, then oh look, there's the tartan being held up there.
Oh, wonderful. Laura Dearhart has the tartan.
Has the tartan on a Highland coup as well. So lots of fun, and everything we do, all of the surplus that we generate goes into the restoration works and the maintenance of. So yeah.
So unless anyone else has a burning question, I'm going to let Charles go because it is quite late over in the UK right now.
It's nearly 1. I mean, you know.
Yeah, nearly 1. not
Nearly
quite
one.
one, so you're fine still. But I did want to thank you so very much, Charles, for taking us through the history and all of the preservation work. And I think everyone on the call is incredibly impressed with your commitment and your devotion and your plans. Preservation is just so incredibly important for our history, for sustainability. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing in that regard. If
Thank you.
anyone has any further questions, you all have my email, and I am very happy to pass anything along to Charles. And or Charles, I don't know if you want me to as well, I can always send something out to all of the attendees also. So on that note, I want to thank all of you for staying with us also. I hope that you enjoyed the talk. And if you ever get a chance to go over to Dunans, I highly recommend it. It's truly a transformative experience. So
Oh,
thank
you.
you all so very much. And if you are in the area and like to come to the Forbes House Museum, we're here too. Please come drop by. So thank you all. Good night.
Yeah,
Have a
thank you all.
pleasant
It's been a
evening.
real pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you all for your messages. I've just been reading them. So thank you. And hopefully see you at Dunans sometime soon.
Yes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.